You know how sometimes life just hits you with something so massive that everything else becomes background noise? That's exactly what happened to me 3 weeks ago when I got the call about my breast cancer results. I'm Paige, I'm 32, and honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around how quickly everything in my life has completely fallen apart since then. Matthew and I have been married for 20 years, literally since we were kids. We grew up together in this small town, got married right out of high school because that's what everyone expected. But somewhere along the way, we just stopped really seeing each other. He's 34 now, works some mind-numbing desk job that he never talks about, and has basically turned into this predictable, routine-obsessed version of himself that I barely recognize anymore. Every single day was exactly the same. Work, dinner in front of the TV, maybe some half-hearted conversation about bills or weekend plans, then bed. Rinse and repeat for years. Even our attempts at starting a family felt mechanical, scheduled, like another item on our endless to-do list. We'd been doing fertility treatments for 2 years, and those monthly appointments became this constant reminder of everything that wasn't working between us. Matthew would sit in those sterile waiting rooms checking his phone while doctors explained procedures and timelines. He'd nod at the right moments, ask a few basic questions, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else entirely. I started feeling like I was invisible in my own marriage, like I could disappear tomorrow, and he'd probably just assume I was running errands until someone told him otherwise. That's when Randy walked into my life about 18 months ago. I was grabbing coffee before work at this little place near my office, feeling particularly invisible after another failed cycle and another night of Matthew falling asleep during a movie without saying 10 words to me. Randy was in line behind me, and when the barista messed up my order, he actually noticed I was frustrated and made some joke that had me laughing for the first time in weeks. He was 29, had this energy and presence that Matthew had lost somewhere along the way. When Randy looked at me, he actually saw me, not just Matthew's wife or some woman going through the motions, but me. We started talking, and before I knew it, an hour had passed, and I was late for work. But I didn't care because someone was finally paying attention to what I had to say. Randy would text me these sweet good morning messages, remember details about conversations we'd had days earlier, ask about my day, and actually listen to the answers. After years of feeling like background music in my own home, suddenly someone was making me feel like the main character in my own life again. When we started meeting for lunch, then drinks after work, it felt natural and right in a way my marriage hadn't in years. The thing that still gets me is how completely oblivious Matthew was to any of this. I'd come home an hour later than usual with flimsy excuses about traffic or errands, and he'd barely look up from whatever show he was binge-watching. I could have been having a full affair, which, okay, I was, and he wouldn't have noticed if I'd brought Randy home for dinner. Part of me was insulted by how easy it was to fool him, but mostly it just confirmed what I'd suspected for years. We weren't really married anymore. We were just two people sharing expenses and a mortgage. Matthew had checked out of our relationship so completely that he didn't even notice when I did the same thing. Randy and I connected on every level that Matthew and I had lost. We'd talk for hours about everything, our dreams, our frustrations, what we wanted from life. Randy listened when I complained about feeling stuck, when I cried about another failed fertility cycle, when I wondered if this was all there was to life. He made me feel understood in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Within a few months, we were talking seriously about our future together. Randy wanted kids too, wanted to build something real and meaningful. We even started seeing a fertility specialist privately, just to get baseline information about our options. Those appointments with Randy were completely different from the ones with Matthew. Randy would ask detailed questions, take notes, hold my hand during the uncomfortable parts. He was present and engaged in a way that made me realize what I'd been missing. Randy would talk about the family we'd have together, the life we'd build once I left Matthew. We looked at apartments online, discussed timelines for when I'd move out, even picked out potential names for our future kids. Everything felt possible with Randy in a way it never had with Matthew. The fertility doctor said our chances looked excellent, and for the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about what was coming next. I know how this sounds, like I'm just another cheating wife making excuses. But you have to understand, I'd been emotionally divorced from Matthew for so long that being with Randy felt like coming back to life after years of sleepwalking. Matthew and I were roommates who occasionally had obligatory sex, going through the motions, because it was easier than admitting we'd grown into completely different people who had nothing in common anymore. So when my doctor called 3 weeks ago with the cancer results, stage 2 breast cancer, aggressive treatment needed, my first instinct wasn't to call my husband of 20 years. It was to call Randy, the person who'd actually been my emotional support system for months. I was terrified and confused, and I needed someone who would really be there for me, not someone who would just add "wife has cancer" to his mental checklist of things to manage. Randy was absolutely incredible when I told him. He immediately started researching treatment options, offering to come with me to the scary appointments, talking about how we'd face this together as a team. He said he loved me enough to handle whatever came our way, and I believed him completely. After feeling invisible for so long, having someone fight for me like that was everything I needed to hear. But I knew I'd have to tell Matthew eventually. The treatment schedule would make it impossible to hide. And honestly, part of me thought this might be the push I needed to finally end our marriage and start fresh with Randy. We'd been planning for me to leave anyway, once we figured out the timing. The cancer diagnosis just made everything feel more urgent, like I needed to stop wasting time in a relationship that was already over in everything but name. The next few months were honestly the most emotionally confusing time of my life. With Randy, I could be completely vulnerable about how scared I was. He came with me to the appointments, where doctors used words like aggressive treatment and survival rates. He'd research clinical trials while I was getting tests done, help me make lists of questions for doctors, hold my hand during the terrible waiting room anxiety that comes with cancer. Randy was amazing about the fertility preservation stuff, too. The doctor said we needed to move quickly if we wanted to freeze eggs before starting chemo, and Randy was completely supportive about the whole process. He said our future family was worth any temporary delay, that he'd wait as long as necessary for me to get healthy so we could start trying for kids again. Those conversations made me fall even deeper in love with him. Here was someone willing to put our dreams on hold for my health. Meanwhile, at home with Matthew, I was playing this weird role of the grateful wife receiving support from her suddenly devoted husband. When I finally told him about the diagnosis, he immediately shifted into caretaker mode, which was honestly shocking. He started taking time off work for appointments, researching treatment centers, even suggesting we look into fertility preservation before I started treatment. For a brief moment, I almost forgot why I'd been planning to leave him. But then I'd remember all those years of feeling invisible, all those conversations where he'd nod without really listening, all those nights when I felt lonelier lying next to him than I did when I was actually alone. His sudden attention felt performative, like he was only being a good husband because I was sick. Where was this version of Matthew when I actually needed emotional support during our fertility struggles? The whole situation felt surreal. During the day, I'd be with Randy planning our future together, talking about treatment timelines and when I'd be ready to leave Matthew. Randy would listen to all my fears about chemo, about losing my hair, about whether I'd still feel attractive during treatment. He'd reassure me that he loved me for who I was, that we'd get through the hard parts together. Then I'd come home to Matthew, who was suddenly this attentive husband, bringing me tea and wanting to discuss doctor recommendations. It was like he'd woken up from a years-long coma and remembered he had a wife. Part of me appreciated the effort, but mostly it felt like too little, too late. If he'd been this present for the past few years, maybe we wouldn't have gotten to this point. The weirdest part was how easy it was to keep both relationships going. Matthew trusted me completely, never questioned where I'd been or why I seemed distracted. When I'd come back from spending the afternoon with Randy, Matthew would assume I'd been dealing with medical stuff or running errands. His complete lack of awareness was almost insulting. Shouldn't your wife's emotional state be something you pay attention to? Randy and I were getting more serious about our timeline. We started actively looking at apartments, discussing how to handle me moving out while dealing with treatment. Randy said he wanted to take care of me during chemo, that Matthew probably wouldn't know how to handle the really difficult emotional parts anyway. He was probably right. Matthew had never been great with feelings, even when I was healthy. Everything felt like it was moving toward the life I actually wanted. Randy would talk about introducing me to his family once things settled down, said his parents would love me. That felt huge, like a real commitment beyond just crisis management. Matthew's family had become strangers over the years, people we saw at holidays out of obligation rather than genuine connection. But then, about 3 weeks before I got my official diagnosis, Randy started acting differently. Not dramatically, just distant. His texts became shorter, less frequent. He'd cancel plans last minute with vague excuses about work or family stuff. When we did see each other, he seemed distracted, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. At first, I figured he was just processing the cancer situation in his own way. Maybe he needed space to work through his feelings about what we were facing together. I tried to be understanding, to give him room to adjust. But the distance was getting harder to ignore, especially when I needed his support more than ever. The fertility appointments became a source of tension too. Randy had been so enthusiastic about preserving our options, but suddenly he was making excuses about scheduling conflicts. When I'd bring up time-sensitive decisions about egg freezing, he'd get vague about timelines, saying we'd figure it out, without actually committing to anything. I started feeling desperate to reconnect with him. I'd send longer texts trying to remind him of our plans together, our dreams about the future. Sometimes he'd respond with enthusiasm, telling me he missed me and was just stressed about work. Those conversations would give me hope that we were just going through a rough patch. But then he'd disappear for days at a time, and I'd be left wondering if I'd imagined our entire relationship. The man who'd been my anchor for 18 months was suddenly treating me like an obligation. It was devastating, especially when I needed emotional support more than ever. Then everything completely imploded. Randy finally decided to be honest about what was really going on in his head, and it was worse than I'd imagined. We met for coffee, and I was hoping we could finally get back on track with our plans. Instead, Randy showed up looking uncomfortable and launched into this speech about how complicated everything had gotten. He said he'd been thinking about what it meant to be with someone going through cancer treatment, and he realized he wasn't ready for that level of responsibility. This was the same man who'd been talking about our future children just weeks earlier, who'd promised to be there through everything. Suddenly, because cancer treatment became real instead of theoretical, he was backing out of our entire relationship. He had the nerve to say he cared about me too much to stay and not be fully present during such a difficult time. Like he was doing me a favor by abandoning me when I needed him most. He said maybe we could reconnect once treatment was over, and life was back to normal, like I was some temporary inconvenience. I asked him what happened to all our plans, our fertility appointments, our future together. He got this distant look and said those were decisions we'd made before we understood what we were really dealing with. After 18 months of building a life together, I'd become too complicated to handle. The most insulting part was how he tried to make it sound noble, like walking away was the mature thing to do. He said Matthew was my husband, and it was his responsibility to take care of me, not Randy's place to interfere. Like I was some burden being passed between caretakers instead of a person he claimed to love. When I got angry and pointed out how selfish he was being, he got defensive. He said he never promised to be my caretaker through a serious illness. Except he literally had promised exactly that, multiple times, when we talked about facing life together. I left that coffee shop feeling more betrayed than I ever had in my life. Randy's rejection was actively cruel, in a way Matthew's neglect had never been. At least Matthew's inattention was passive. Randy's abandonment was a deliberate choice to hurt someone when they were most vulnerable. So there I was, facing cancer treatment without the person I'd planned to face it with. Stuck in a marriage I'd emotionally left months ago. I had to go home to Matthew and pretend to be grateful for his support while grieving the loss of the relationship that had actually mattered to me. The next few days were brutal. Randy wouldn't answer my texts or calls, completely cutting off communication like our 18 months together had meant nothing. Meanwhile, Matthew was being extra attentive, completely oblivious to the fact that I was falling apart for reasons that had nothing to do with cancer. But the universe wasn't done destroying my life yet. Everything exploded 3 days ago when Matthew decided to help organize my medical paperwork. I'd been keeping everything scattered on purpose, but he wanted to create some system to track everything. That's when he found the fertility clinic paperwork with Randy's name on it, dated from months before my diagnosis. At first, I tried to play it off, like Randy was just a friend who'd offered to come for moral support. But Matthew's not stupid, and the paperwork made it obvious that Randy wasn't just there as emotional support. He started asking more questions, and I knew there was no point in lying anymore. So I told him everything, that Randy and I had been together for 18 months, that we'd been trying to get pregnant together, that I'd been planning to leave him. The look on Matthew's face was devastating. Not angry, just completely broken. He asked if that's why I hadn't told him about the cancer right away, and I had to admit I'd called Randy first. He asked why I'd told him about the cancer at all if I was planning to leave, and honestly, I didn't have a good answer. Because Randy had abandoned me? Because I was scared? None of those reasons sounded good out loud. Then Matthew did something I wasn't expecting. He went through my phone while I was sleeping that night. Complete violation of my privacy, by the way. He saw all the messages between Randy and me, our plans to leave him, even my recent desperate attempts to win Randy back. He'd found everything. When I woke up, Matthew was standing there with my phone. He'd read about our fertility planning, our apartment hunting, our discussions about leaving him. He'd seen Randy's messages about needing space and my pathetic attempts to save our relationship. The worst part was that Matthew looked more disappointed than angry. Like he felt sorry for me rather than furious. He said he finally understood why I'd been so distant. Why I'd seemed relieved rather than devastated when Randy stopped responding. Matthew filed for divorce the next morning. No discussion, no attempt at counseling, no consideration for my cancer treatment. He gave me 1 week to find somewhere else to live, because the house is in his name, and he's not supporting someone who'd been planning to abandon him anyway. I called Randy immediately, thinking maybe this crisis would make him realize we belonged together. But he wouldn't even take my calls. One of his friends finally told me Randy had started seeing someone new. Someone without complications. 18 months of love had become complications. I had to move back in with my parents, which is humiliating at 32. They're not sympathetic either. They keep asking how I could throw away 20 years for some guy who abandoned me when I got sick. But they don't understand how emotionally starved I was, how invisible Matthew made me feel for years. The divorce is moving forward quickly, because Matthew wants everything settled before my treatment starts. His lawyer says he's being generous about the financial division. But I don't feel lucky. I feel abandoned by both men, right when I need support most. Matthew seems lighter without me, according to his sister. Apparently he's going out with friends more, seems happier, 20 years together, and he's fine after a few weeks. It just proves he never really needed me the way I needed to be needed. I start chemotherapy next week, and I'll be doing it alone. Everyone's decided I'm the villain, but they don't understand. I was suffocating in a marriage that had been over for years. Randy gave me 18 months of feeling valued and genuinely loved. Was I supposed to accept being invisible forever? Maybe I made mistakes in how I handled things, but my feelings were valid. I deserved to be with someone who made me feel alive, who saw me as more than just a wife going through the motions. Now I'm facing cancer alone because I had the audacity to want more than mediocrity. 2 months from now, when Matthew's moved on completely and Randy's forgotten I existed, I'll still be here dealing with the consequences of choosing myself for once. Maybe that makes me selfish, but at least I'm not settling anymore. Everyone wants me to be sorry, to admit I was wrong, but the truth is my marriage was already over long before Randy came along. I just finally had the courage to stop pretending otherwise.